beginning of my journey.
Mm-hmm.
It was a long time ago that it began, because it was as part of my seminary training, we have a year of internship, and I was offered this opportunity to do what they then called an experimental internship in urban ministries, and was invited to join 5 other seminarians from across the country for a year, and they settled us. My church that I was attached to was right here at St. Mark's Lutheran Church, right on 36th Place in Vermont, which then, by the way, was a block and a half from USC, because USC hadn't expanded all that way. 1968.
Mm-hmm.
It was a time when there was a lot of importance given to training for urban work. And so we were really lucky to get in on the ground floor of that training and of that year. And I was just exposed. I really had little exposure except for, a year on the south side of Chicago being in school, to cross-cultural life.
Mm-hmm.
But coming here, it really was right in our face.
Mm-hmm.
We just, at that time, the community around us was primarily African American.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first exposure, really, in a long-term, intensive time to a community other than my white roots.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, in part, one of the things I know that just surprised me and that was so transformative for me was the welcoming, the hospitality of the African American community in 1968. That was 3 years after the Watts riots.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so much anger and so much resentment in the air. And it really shocked me to be accepted as a white person. My wife and I just accepted so lovingly, so fully. And not just accepted, we were like part of the family, coming for dinner, being part of all the intimate, life events of people. And I could only think, wow, look how I'm accepted as a white person into the black community, and think what would happen if these folks were to come back to my hometown, into my community. They just never would have received that hospitality. 1977, when I was called back to St. Mark's, by then the community had begun to change, and we were exposed over the next 30 years, not just then to the African American community, but initially to an African community, which was very large at that time. There were a number of Africans attending Woodbury University, which used to be in the heart of the city. And so suddenly we were dealing with Nigerians and Liberians and Sierra Leone, people from Sierra Leone, all different cultures, very interesting. Then in the 80s, the exposure to a very large influx of folks from Belize, from Central America. So African descent people, African Latino descent people from a Central American country who spoke English. And then later in the 90s, the explosion in our communities around this part of South Central LA to the Latino population, which was growing. So each community, we experienced the same, though, in the sense of just incredible hospitality and openness. And in all those cases also, we tended to be dealing with folks who came out of a lower economic background, hadn't had opportunities as much for formal education, but had education in other ways that were far superior to a lot of people's college and PhD degrees. 25 years. Well, we were, that started back then 26 years ago, probably, more or less, when Sister Diane Donahue and I were community co-workers, I would say, in the late 70s. And she just came to me one day and she said, Brian, I'm just concerned, we need to do something about the housing, because there's so much pressure from downtown that's starting to happen here. And what honestly, the concerns in that day were that the sweatshops were being pushed south that were just north of the freeway, and of the 10 freeway. And as they got pushed south, there was a sense that all these communities around here, which were lower economic and a lot of heavy rentals, that people would lose their housing, and they'd be houses and businesses would be replaced by sweatshops, and and that we would lose this fine, soulful community. And then that combined with the USC expansion, which was always happening. At that time, USC mostly moving north. So she said, we need to develop some pockets, some places where people can have affordable housing, so we'll be assured of having a community that's mixed use, a mixed use community of different economic and racial. Because it wasn't good enough just to build housing or affordable housing. It had to be done in a way which was also represented justice and human dignity. So we're really trying to do some transformation of people, both within our communities, because we're needing to build bridges between the various ethnic and language communities here in LA, and with those outside of our communities. So I'm focusing on doing that myself for these next few years. And it's been hard for me not to be involved in this neighborhood, because it's been a part of my life, most of my life now. So well, I'm happy to be able to stay with the board of Esperanza for now. I think, you know, at another point, if my wife and I step back a little bit more and start traveling or something, I may not be able to do that. But I'm happy to continue working with Esperanza with all that I can to work with, as I can with Unidad, which is still trying to save this neighborhood, because I really, I feel so strongly that I'd like to see these principles of Esperanza continue to take root, you know, and that we have a community, not that doesn't welcome students or that doesn't welcome people of wealth as well, but a community that really wants everybody to be, and understands that we're all going to be here together. It's not one coming in at the expense of the other, which has tended to be what's always happened and is exactly what's happening now.